Well, I was born in Romania. I was indeed, and it's true, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so my first language was German, and I still speak, more or less fluent German. And I've lived in a number of places. I'm a wandering Jew, and so actually during the war, it was my mother's sister and I, just because my father had been conscripted by the Soviets and vanished into who knows where. But anyway, after the war, we lived in DP camps, displaced persons camps, and eventually we, in between, we ended up living in England for a year on the Isle of Man, because my mother had an uncle who lived in the Isle of Man, and he invited us to come stay there. So I actually learned English on the Isle of Man. I don't think I have a British accent, but but anyway. And from there we applied for, to be admitted into the United States. And we arrived in New York Harbor on June 2nd, 1951. And it was a whole other world. Here we were. And so, we people who move around a lot, we're adaptable. We come to places and, we learn the language, and initially it was hard. It was hard, especially for my mother, who spoke 7 languages fluently, but had trouble finding a job in New York as even a file clerk, because she was a foreigner. So there were, but eventually we all adapted to our different roles. My sister, somebody very much wanted. So anyway, my sister got married and moved to Atlanta, and I stayed with my mother, who didn't approve of my wanting to be an artist. She said I'd end up being a bum in the Bowery. Unfortunately, nowadays I can't afford a loft in the Bowery. But anyway, I had the good fortune of being accepted in the High School of Music and Art, which is an extraordinary, it's a government-funded school that's an extraordinary school. And everybody I know, everybody who's ever gone there is very grateful for that, for having had that opportunity. Because our teachers weren't teaching us to copy the old masters. They wanted us to express ourselves. And also being in New York City, we were exposed to all kinds of cultural events that were very nourishing. It was the museums and the clubs and the jazz places and all kinds of things. So it was a very, very rich environment. Eventually, my sister got married and moved away, and I was living with my mother. And at a certain point, I was going to Hunter College, and I had a friend there who had lived in Mexico. She'd married a Mexican, I believe. And she told me about Mexico, that, that it was sunny. This was in November when it's rarely sunny. But the people smiled, and I had to take the subway to get to school and back. Nobody ever smiled. And, it was very seductive to tell the story about Mexico. And I decided that I wanted to go to Mexico. So I had some money. My grandfather gave me $500 when I graduated from high school, which was a lot of money at that time. And I decided I would, I wanted to go to Mexico, and I was a willful young person. So my mother was kind of horrified at the idea that I should go to Mexico. And she was worried that I might fall into the hands of, what do they call it, white...
slavers.
Yeah, white slavers, those guys. No white slaver ever tried to get me, though. I wasn't their type. And so I got a 6-month visa to go to Mexico City, and I ended up living there for about 14 years. Wow. Nobody tried to kidnap me, though. And so it was a wonderful experience. I learned to speak Spanish. I had taken Spanish in school, but you learn, you know, in school they teach you more grammar than conversation. So you could only sort of articulate very clumsy little sentences. But because I was living there, and you know, I didn't want to be in a separate community of people who only spoke English. I learned Spanish. Spanish came to me quite easily. And actually, the first several weeks in Mexico City, I was living in a hotel because I didn't, you know, hadn't known anybody there. So I got a room in a hotel that had been recommended to me that was very cheap. It was actually very cheap. It was like 60 pesos a night, which at that time was about $5. So it wasn't very expensive. But anyway, so I lived in a hotel, and I got tired of being there also because when I'd go out on the street, guys would follow me and say, "Mamacita." So I went one day to the American Express office to pick up my mail. That's where foreigners go to pick up their mail. And there were these two French guys there, and we got to talking. They had been in Mexico a little longer than I was, so we got to talking about different things. And they said they were heading off to downtown to this former convent, which was a place where artists and writers were, you know, kind of, it was like a squat where they were living there and doing their work. And I thought, wow, that sounds like my kind of place. So I went with them and arrived there. And in among this group, I found the people who have been my friends for the rest of my life. And the one person who approached me, I mean, I thought, well, who am I, right? I mean, nobody knew me, and I was, you know, I wasn't quite an artist yet. I had come to Mexico with art supplies and plans to paint and stuff like that, but you know, I was approached by this one woman whose name was Cora Van Willigen, who later I found out she had been, you know, like was born into a kind of semi-royal family, had traveled the world as a high-end model and had been all over the place. And for some reason she approached me and said she was planning to go in the next couple of days to this island in the south of Mexico, in Guanajuato state. And would I like to go with her? And I said, well, why not? So we went there on a second or third class bus overnight. You know, it's people with baskets and chicken and that good stuff. And we arrived there, and it was like another world. It was really amazing, you know, because too bad I have still repeated these embroidered. I could have worn it tonight to show it to you, but I never thought it wasn't the kind of weather for it. That she created an industry for these people so they could sell their wares. And because what she did was draw maps of areas. And she had, as I said, she had been a high fashion model and all of that good stuff. But when she came to Mexico, she fell in love with the place, and she never left again. And so she spent her life fighting the, you know, I don't know exactly how it would translate to English, but those people who are trying to exploit the indigenous people. And so she, you know, we continued being friends for my rest of my stay in Mexico until she died, actually. And so it was an extraordinary time because I met all kinds of people. I even hitchhiked, but nobody ever tried to kidnap me. I was kidnappable material. And I always, and especially once I was speaking Spanish more fluently, people just accepted me, and they were amazed because a lot of Americans come and live there 10 or 15 years and still say, you know, like a clumsy sentence of nothing. They might say, don't you speak a real language? Something like that. So actually, one of when I was still living in the hotel, I went, I researched some of the galleries. There was a little gallery not too far from me that had recently opened, and I said to them, I told them that I'd been an art student and blah, blah, blah. And the owner invited me to be a gallery sitter. And he said he couldn't afford to pay me, but he could pay me in pre-Columbian pieces. So nothing super valuable, but you know, I still have a few little pre-Columbian pieces. And one day as I was sitting there alone, there came a man and looked around, and he left at the exhibit that was on at that moment. And he came back, I don't know, 10 minutes later, and he said, Signora, they just murdered your president. Yeah. So that was the beginning of the 60s. So that was a shock. And
We just all felt it.
Yeah. So anyway, I lived there, you know, I met my first husband because eventually I rented a furnished apartment, and I had a neighbor's, next door I had a neighbor of this Dutch lesbian couple. Downstairs from me there was this young architect who had recently graduated from architectural school, and this young architect would periodically knock on my door. And so not to make a long story, we got married eventually. So sadly this young architect died about a year ago. He had Parkinson's disease. This was many years later. He's the father of a son. That was very sad. Anyway, that was a long story. I hope I didn't bore you.
I have a question.
Yes.
A lot of your work appears to be based on memories and remembering really important things that have happened in the past and in your past, but some of them don't seem to be that. What is it that inspires you to make the art that you make?
Well, hard to say. It's, you know, it's a moment of inspiration. You know, sometimes I look at something and I click my camera. And other times I might, you know, be sort of blind to it. But I love people. I love taking pictures of people, and people respond quite well to me. You know, I'm not intrusive. I'm not aggressive about it. And so even here in Utica, New York, I've taken pictures of strangers, and I come, you know, we're walking towards each other, and I say, I have my camera out, and I say, do you mind, you know, I'm a photographer, something like that. And I like taking pictures of people because I like people. And in some of these photographs, well, some of them, this was in Mexico. It was in a convent, actually, a convent of Tismana in western Romania. And it was a celebration of water. Did I say Mexico? I meant Romania.
Yeah.
I meant Romania. Romania, well, Mexico too, is a very arid country. And so to celebrate water, it's like an important festival. And I just stood there watching them. You know, I have empathy for people. I care about people, so I think they feel that. They, you know, and they didn't mind my taking pictures. And this is a wedding, also in Romania, and another place where I just said wedding. Anyway, it's a wedding. I was trying to get to Romania at a certain point, and I got a grant actually to travel there, but I didn't know anybody there, and it's hard to arrive in a country without knowing a single soul. But in that I got a magazine in the mail, quite you know, coincidentally, that talked about a group of young photographers in this town, Cluj, in Romania, who had like a photo club, and who would like to be in touch with people abroad. So I wrote this guy a note, and so he was my contact person. And I won't give you all the details about I bought the ticket and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I ended up going, and his name was Bogdan, and he sort of, we got to know each other and walked around, and he told me that he was invited to go to this wedding, and would I like to go? I said, sure. He said, but you know, to go to the wedding, you'd have to pay 20 lei. Very unusual, but I said, sure, 20 lei is not like a heap of money. So we went, and it was a wild wedding. It was this, the bride was this wild woman, she actually was. And she had, I don't remember exactly if she had a boyfriend or what, but had a series of taxis, but actually it was in these taxis that we got driven to the wedding and then to a bar and then to the reception and stuff like that, and she got terribly drunk. And so on and so forth. And then, you know, I didn't see them anymore, but actually when I came back to America, to my home, to my darkroom, I made a print of this photograph, which I thought was quite
Very beautiful.
a very nice photo, even though it didn't live, I don't think it ended up being a happily ever after wedding.
Well, it was for the moment.
It was, yeah. And so I told Bogdan, who came to visit, actually when we went together out to New Berlin to Carol Kinney's place, and, you know, stuff like that. And I told him that I made a print, you know, to give him. He said, don't bother, they're already divorced. So that's why I have the print. Yeah, it was short and happy.
The boyfriend with the taxis.
Yeah, right. So I don't know what happened to them after that. I can't go through that. You want to know about any of the other pictures?
Yeah, well, can you talk about the 9/11?
Yeah. So I did a long series, you know, like everybody else, 9/11 made a huge impression on me. In fact, I still can visualize what I was doing when it happened. Basically, I had just gotten out of bed, and I was shaking out a sheet. I was making my bed, and that the light and the sheet still, you know, is imprinted in me. Because then I heard, it was in that moment that I heard on the radio that an airplane just hit the Twin Towers, and I thought, you know, wow. And actually I rushed to the phone I had a friend who lived near the Twin Towers whom I stayed with to see, you know, to see if she was okay or what's happening down there, but there was no answer, there was no connection, it was impossible to make phone calls. And then when I heard about the next plane hitting the tower, I knew that it was really bad news. And so, and it had a huge change in the, you know, the world around us. And so I did a series about that during a time of the different ramifications. Like I have somewhere a photograph here that shows the airports that were empty. Yeah. So because and this photograph is my hand when I saw, you know, when I realized what was happening. It was like keeping it out. I put my hand in front, you know, sort of, and several days after I had, no, not actually, a couple of weeks after, I had to go to Colorado for residency. But when I traveled, the airports were totally empty. It was like really, which was scary, you know, which was weird. It's, you know, not that I love, you know, super crowded airports either, but this was sort of the opposite. So it was scary. And I started a series of photographs of the different things that I saw. I have this one photograph that I think, I'm not sure if it's made in, oh, here it is. This is called Surveillance, this photograph. And basically, it's two photographs. This is a video camera that was attached to a pole in the gas station, actually, on the corner of where I live. You know, it was a snowstorm, and I like to go out in a snowstorm and take pictures. And so it was like the video camera was surveilling the snow. And then this photograph, which was not on the same day or anything, but I was looking out my window where I lived at the time. I had a good view of the street out the window. And I watched this woman getting into her car, which had to look a little bit like from a mystery story. And so the two together I titled Surveillance. Because in fact there was a lot of surveillance in that period. Yeah, and I have another photograph that is not in this show well, I'll put it online. That it's actually a combination of a photograph I took near the brewery. There was a drugstore there that got broken into, and the window was like a circle of crashed glass, and I took a picture. Is that it? Oh, I did make a picture. There it is. Yeah, sounds good. Okay.
Excuse me. Sorry. There you go.
So this photograph I took in New York City, and what it is, it's in New York City, Manhattan, there are all these kiosks on the corners that tell
Looks
you.
like a model.
Yeah, it's about a film announcement. And so I found it attractive, and I took it in what you see in the background is, just the city. So, and it seemed to match up well with this, even though in time and location they're unrelated. So I do that often, as, thematically they're related, but, in actual time they're not. So, anything else I can tell you?
I just appreciate the attention to these kinds of things,
Yeah.
this rise of, and of course you'd be attuned to that.
Yeah, well, also, being a photographer, I'm a snoop. I snoop on, I observe people, so that's what one has to do, not that I, break into their houses or anything, I haven't done that yet. But yeah.
Attuned to the climate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, I forget what I call the series. I have the paperwork, I wrote about it too. But in this very moment, I can't remember. And then I also have some little things that are personal history things, like over here. I'm holding an ancient little strip of a photograph. My father, my mother, and my sister. I wasn't born yet. Yes. And here is my shadow on the wall the first time when I came back to Chernobyl. And I was, it was like my hometown, and here I was. So there's my shadow.
Okay, do we have any more questions, please, to Sylvia? This is pretty unique opportunity here to ask the artists about the work. So please take advantage of that. Otherwise, I would suggest that we give Sylvia a hand.